The heart. This is visible, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. The heart. I want to remind you that exam number 2 is the cardiovascular system, the blood vessels, and the respiratory system. I don't want you to walk into exam number 2 and not know the blood flow through the heart. I would venture to tell you that 30% of the exam is on blood flow through the heart. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to try and make it pretty easy for you to understand. All right? All right. Where's the heart? Well, the heart is located in the mediastinum. It's actually in the middle mediastinum. Okay, that's actually where it is. It's in the middle. It's in the middle. Okay, it's between the two lungs and sits in a cavity called the pericardial cavity, which we will discuss further. But here it is, the middle mediastinum. It's flanked by both lungs, the right and the left, and superior to the heart are the great vessels, which we'll talk about. It's enclosed by a serous membrane. The serous membrane that encloses the heart is called the pericardium. All serous membranes are 2 layers. The parietal layer is the parietal layer that lines the cavity, and the serous layer surrounds the organ of the heart. And in between those 2 layers is serous fluid to prevent friction. Okay? So you have a serous pericardium, which attaches to the organ, and a parietal area of the pericardium that attaches to the pericardial cavity, All right? Any questions on that? Good. And here it is. Visceral and parietal. Visceral and parietal. The heart wall has 3 layers. The outer wall is called the epicardium. The inner wall is a myocardium. The word myo means muscle. So this is the muscle of the heart. This is the muscle, the heart muscle itself. That's the middle layer of the heart wall. The internal layer of the endocardium is through. The blood flows.
You're like breaking up.
Yeah, Professor, you're lagging.
Yeah, we can't really hear you.
Can't really hear you. Is there like a chat button here?
I have no clue. I can't hear him. I think he's like frozen right now.
Yeah, in the corner is a chat button.
Yeah, on the top.
What?
We can't hear you at all.
What did I miss just then?
Hello.
Can you not hear me?
No, it keeps like breaking up. You're like very staticky.
That's not good. Let me see what I can do. 1 second here. Let's see. Huh. Seems I'm okay here.
Well, it's kind of working now, but You was definitely just going in and out.
How about now?
It's better now.
Okay, all right. So let me go over it again then. There are three layers of the heart wall. The epicardium is the outer layer. Okay, the outer layer. Actually, what it really is the serous pericardium. So the epicardium is actually the serous pericardium, the outer layer of the heart wall. The inner layer of the heart wall, or the middle layer, is the myocardium. Myo means muscle. So this is the heart muscle itself. This is the heart muscle itself. The inner layer of the heart layers is the endocardium. The endocardium is what touches the blood. So anything inside of the layer that touches the blood is made from endocardium. So the heart valves, which touch the blood, are made from endocardium. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. And down below, I want to re-emphasize this. The epicardium, which is the outer layer of the heart wall, is actually the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Okay? Again, the myocardium is the cardiac muscle, and the endocardium is the internal layer of the heart that touches the blood. That touches the blood. Okay? Here it is. Epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. Okay. There are basically four heart chambers. There are two upper chambers, and those chambers are called atria. And the two lower chambers are called ventricles. So you have a right and left atrium and a right and left ventricle. And we'll talk a lot more about both chambers. This is a very important diagram because it shows you the veins and arteries that come from the heart and also take blood into the heart. And we'll talk much more about them in a few minutes. Okay, let's start with how the blood gets into the heart from the body. All blood that is deoxygenated, meaning lacks oxygen, because the oxygen has been used up by all the body tissues. When blood returns to the heart, it returns to the heart in veins. And there are three major veins that bring blood back to the heart. And the blood that they bring back to the heart has very little oxygen in it, otherwise known as deoxygenated blood. So the right atrium receives blood from the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. These are all three big veins. The superior vena cava has deoxygenated blood from the head, neck, and upper thorax. The inferior vena cava has deoxygenated blood from the lower body, the legs, and abdomen. And the coronary sinus is a vein that drains the heart itself. So all of these veins, the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus, bring deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Who has questions?
Not
You're
right.
all
That's pretty
straight.
straightforward.
Okay, just making sure. Stop me at any time.
Actually, I do have one question.
Go ahead, and you need to turn up your volume. I can barely hear you. Go.
Sorry. Yeah. What parts of the body was the superior vena cava again?
It's the head and neck and the upper arms and upper thorax.
Okay, thank you.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay, no problem. Then the blood goes into, from the right atrium, drops into the right ventricle. Okay? So the blood coming into the right atrium and the blood going into the right ventricle is deoxygenated blood. That's why it's blue. That's why it's blue. Has little oxygen in it. Little oxygen in it. Okay? The right ventricle pumps the blood into the lungs. Into the lungs. And once it's in the lungs, the lungs get rid of waste, carbon dioxide, and gives the blood oxygen. Everybody follow me so far?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good. The oxygenated blood from the lungs goes into the pulmonary veins. These pulmonary veins have oxygenated blood in them. In an adult male or an adult female that's non-pregnant, this is the only vein in the body that carries oxygenated blood, because the majority, 99% of all the other veins, carry deoxygenated blood. Everybody got that?
Is that why veins are blue?
Mm-hmm. That's the reason. That's it. Okay? So the anomaly here is that the pulmonary veins in an adult male are the only veins that carry oxygen. All right? If you look here, these are the regular veins. Here's the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, coronary sinus. But if you look at the pulmonary veins, look, they're red. They're carrying oxygen. So from the lungs, pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood into the left atrium. All right? The left atrium receives blood. Oh no, this is wrong. This should be left ventricle. The left ventricle receives blood from the left atrium. Now you have oxygenated blood. And the left ventricle pumps the blood out of the heart into the entire body so that all the tissues can now have oxygen. Okay? I'm going to repeat that one more time. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from three major veins: the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. The right atrium takes that deoxygenated blood and puts it in the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps the blood into the lungs. Into the lungs. Once that blood is oxygenated, it now goes into the pulmonary veins. There are 4 of them. These are the only veins in an adult male that carry oxygen. And that blood goes into the left atrium. The left atrium puts the blood into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pumps the blood into the systemic circulation so that all the tissues can get oxygen. That's the blood flow through the heart. Simplified. We'll talk more about that. Everybody understand that so far?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you any questions on fibrous skeleton. This is just beating a dead horse. Okay? But you need to know the valves of the heart. The valves of the heart. The valves of the heart open and close in response to pressure changes as the heart contracts and relaxes. There are 4 heart valves. There are 2 atrioventricular valves. Those valves are between the right atria and ventricle and the left atria and ventricle. That's why they're called AV valves, atrioventricular. They're between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the left atrium and the left ventricle. The reason that these valves are there is to prevent backflow from the ventricles into the atria. There are 2 outflow valves. Outflow means the blood is leaving the heart. There's one on the right side and there's one on the left side. And they're called semi-lunar valves, half moons. And they prevent backflow from the arteries into the ventricles. Okay, so there are 4 heart valves, 2 outflow valves, and 2 AV valves. Okay? And they look different. They look very different. The AV valves have cords on them, heartstrings. And these are known as chordae tendineae, heartstrings. These strings are attached to papillary muscles. And when those papillary muscles become taut, the valve closes. And when these papillary muscles are relaxed, the blood opens. The valve opens. Okay? These are AV valves in between the atria and the ventricle. In between the atria and the ventricle. And we'll talk about the bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve. Talk about that in a few minutes. These are the AV valves. The outflow valves are semilunar valves. It's completely different. All they are cusps. And we'll talk about those also. What's important is that when one set of valves opens, the other closes. Let me talk to you about these valves, okay? The AV valve. There is a bicuspid valve and a tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve is on the right side. It is between the right atria and the right ventricle. The bicuspid valve is on the left side. It is between the left atria and the left ventricle. The bicuspid valve has another name, and that other name is the mitral valve. The mitral valve. So the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are AV valves in between the atria and ventricle. There are two semilunar outflow valves. The one on the right is the pulmonary valve. And you can remember that the right ventricle puts the blood into the lungs, and it goes through the pulmonary valve. And when it goes through the pulmonary valve, it goes into the pulmonary artery. Goes into the pulmonary artery. 99% of all arteries carry oxygenated blood. However, the pulmonary artery carries venous blood. Remember, it's coming from the right ventricle, and it needs to go into the lungs to get oxygen. Okay? So that's the outflow of the right side. The outflow of the left side is the aortic valve. The aortic valve puts the blood into the aorta. The aorta is the biggest artery in your body, and it carries blood that's ejected from the heart from the left ventricle, and that blood is oxygenated. So these are the valves. Okay? So, does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is the circulation money slide. Here it is. Study this slide. I'm going to probably ask you 20 questions on this one slide. Okay? Look at it very carefully. Let's start with the venous system that brings the blood to the heart. It's deoxygenated blood. There are three veins that bring blood to the heart: the SVC, the IVC, and the coronary sinus. It brings deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. The right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, puts blood into the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps the blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary trunk and arteries into the lungs. The right side of the heart is all deoxygenated blood. Once it gets into the lungs, it loses carbon dioxide and gains oxygen. It is now oxygenated blood. The lungs puts the oxygenated blood into the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins put oxygenated blood into the left atrium. The left atrium, through the bicuspid or mitral AV valve, puts oxygenated blood into the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps the blood through the aortic valve, outflow valve, into the aorta and systemic arteries and the tissues get oxygen and it starts all over again. Any questions on the flow of blood through the heart and out of the heart? I take that as a no.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Thank you, though.
Okay. Just want to make sure it's straightforward because I can ask you questions that won't be so straightforward. I want to make sure you understand it. I think you have learned from exam number 1 that you got to think a little bit. It's not as straightforward as you think it is. Okay? Very important to understand this. This is the essence of this chapter. The essence of this chapter. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more, but this is the essence of the chapter. I guarantee you 30% of your exam will be on this slide alone. Okay? Very important. Okay. How does the heart itself get blood? It gets its blood from the coronary circulation. There are coronary arteries and coronary veins. The coronary circulation supplies the heart muscle with blood. The coronaries are a branch of the aorta. So all the coronary arteries come from the aorta. It gives the heart oxygen. Once the heart uses that oxygen, the coronary veins remove carbon dioxide and waste from the heart muscle itself. And those branches of the coronary veins merge into the coronary sinus, which is one of the 3 major veins that bring deoxygenated blood back to the heart. Okay? Here is your aorta. Here is your aorta. Coronary arteries, the left coronary artery, the right coronary artery, the circumflex branches are all branches of the aorta. Okay? So that is extremely important. I want you to notice that there's an arch to the aorta. Okay? The ascending aorta takes blood and puts it into these 3 main arteries, which we will talk about. I want you to know these 3 major arteries that are branches of the arch of the aorta, because this is where the majority of oxygenated blood goes into the upper part of your body. And then there's an arch, and the arch goes down into the descending aorta. Here is the descending aorta. All right? And this is where the oxygenated blood goes into the lower part of the body. All right? Here you see a branch of the superior vena cava. Here's the inferior vena cava. And here's the coronary sinus. Those are the 3 veins that put deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. All right? Let me go back because I want to make sure that we understand something. Whoops. Here is the ascending aorta. Here is the arch of the aorta. Here are the 3 major branches of the arch of the aorta. The left common carotid. The left common carotid puts blood into the brain. The brachiocephalic trunk puts blood into the face and also the upper arms. And the left subclavian artery puts blood into the chest wall and the arms. Okay? So the three branches of the arch of the aorta are the left common carotid, the left subclavian artery, and the brachiocephalic trunk. Know these branches. Know these branches of the arch of the aorta. Okay. Cardiac muscle tissue. You kind of learned this in AP1, but I just want to go over a little bit of it. There are junctions in the cardiac muscle tissue. There are junctions in every tissue, but in the cardiac muscle tissue, there are gap junctions. And the reason that these are important is because electricity travels through these gap junctions. It travels through tubules of the endoplasmic reticulum, through neurotransmitters, and through intercalculated discs to give you rhythm, heart rhythm. Next week, I will talk to you about heart rhythm, okay? But this is AP1. I'm not going to ask you too many questions on AP1, but just realize that those of you who have not taken AP1, the junctions in the heart are gap junctions because of the electricity that is in the heart itself, in the muscle tissues of the heart. Okay? You don't have to know. You learn this all in AP1. I'm certainly not going to talk to you about A bands and I bands. Enough. That's enough already. Okay? But just to give you a taste of next week, we're going to talk about the conduction system of the heart. The system, the heart muscle cells itself are excitable. They have auto rhythm. They can beat without the brain. They can beat without the brain. And the most fascinating surgery you'll ever want to see is a heart transplant. When they take that heart out of the ice and they sew it into the chest of a person that needs the heart, and then they shock it with electricity and it beats on its own. You don't need a brain for your heart to beat. Okay? So that is very, very important. It reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was I can't remember what the name of the show was, but when he was a creature from the future, came back to kill somebody, and he took his hand and he put it in this guy's chest and he pulled the heart out and the heart was still beating. That's what happens. That's what happens. You don't need a body to have your heart beat. All you need is electricity. That's all you need is electricity. And of course, electricity can stop your heart also. Okay? Cardiac muscle cells repeatedly generate spontaneous active potentials that trigger contractions of the heart. Very important. Some of this is AP1. I'm not going to dwell on a lot of it, but I'm going to talk to you about rhythm next week. The heart muscle cells have a completely different function than the muscle cells that beat in the heart. They have conduction. They secrete electricity down into the muscle itself. And the conduction system is very different from the flow of blood through the heart. The conduction system starts in the sinoatrial node, known as the SA node. It is in the right atrium. The conduction system starts in the SA node. It is the pacemaker of your heart. It sends conduction into the AV node. The AV node is just what it says. It's in between the atria and the ventricle on the right side. The conduction then goes through the AV bundle, also known as the bundle of His, H-I-S. It then branches out into the septum, which is known as the bundle branches. There's a right bundle branch and a left bundle branch. It ends up in the Purkinje fibers of the ventricles, the right and the left. This is the conduction electrical system of the heart, unlike the flow of blood. It starts in the SA node, it goes to the AV node, it goes through the bundle of His, it branches into the right and left bundle branches, it ends up in the Purkinje fibers of both the right and the left ventricle. And I will show you next week EKGs, which prove that you have a conduction system in your heart. Okay? Any questions on the conduction system? You still there?
Yep, we're all here.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. The pacemaker of the heart is the SA node. Is the SA node. It can be affected by outside stimuli. Okay? If you're scared, your SA node will beat faster because of epinephrine. If you're put to sleep by an anesthesiologist, your SA node will be put to sleep and will beat slower. Okay? But we'll talk more about the SA node and all of the others when we talk about EKGs. Okay? This is a review for people that have had AP1. This is brand new for people who have never had AP1. We're talking about action potentials. We're talking about depolarization and repolarization. To simplify it, depolarization of an action potential means that all of the sodium channels are open. So there is a rapid inflow of sodium into the membrane, and into the cell. Then you get a plateau. And that's usually due to calcium inflow into the cell. And then you repolarize, and that's usually due to potassium leaving the cell. So depolarization is sodium influx. Plateauing is due to calcium influx, and repolarization is due to potassium leaving the cell. Okay? So no depolarization, plateauing, and repolarization. When the heart beats, it's a muscle, so it generates ATP. ATP in biology is energy, is stored energy. And it does that by using oxygen, Your heart beats from day 18 as a fetus until you die. Okay? We will talk much more about ECGs or EKGs next week, but it is a recording of the electrical changes that accompany every heartbeat. This is one heartbeat. One heartbeat. The blue is atrial contraction. The yellow is ventricular contraction. And we'll talk much more about P, Q, R, S, and T next week. Okay? You don't really have just is way too confusing. You don't have to know this. I'm going to simplify it next week. Okay? But what you should know about is the cardiac cycle. One cardiac cycle consists of systole, which means contraction, and relaxation, which is diastole. So diastole is relaxation and contraction is systole of both the atria and both the ventricles. Both atria have to contract and relax, followed by contraction and relaxation of both ventricles. It is based on electrical events. It is based on pressure changes. It is based on heart sounds. It is based on volume changes, and is based on mechanical events. Okay? So that is very important to understand, and we'll talk more about that next week. We'll talk more about the electrical events next week also. This is very confusing. You don't need to know a lot of this. But you do have to know this formula. Cardiac output is the volume of blood ejected from either the left or right ventricle into the aorta or pulmonary trunk every minute. Stroke volume. Stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out of the ventricle in one beat. So the formula for cardiac output is cardiac output in milliliters per minute is equal to stroke volume, milliliters per beat, times heart rate, which is beats per minute. This is volume of blood pumped out of the ventricle in one beat. Cardiac output is SV times HR. Before we talk about stroke volume and what affects it, tell me what affects your heart rate? Anybody?
Running.
Running,
Exercise.
exactly. Exercise, what else?
Hyperventilation.
Hyperventilation. You are correct. Let me ask you a question. You hold your breath underwater. Is your heartbeat fast or slow?
Slow.
Slow. That is correct. That is correct. You see a snake in front of your feet. Is your heartbeat fast or slow?
Fast.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So there are many things that affect heart rate. But what about if you take ecstasy? Let's say you take a pill of ecstasy, what happens to your heart rate?
Doesn't it beat fast?
Yes, it beats fast. What if you smoke 2 cigarettes?
Fast?
Yeah, because nicotine stimulates the SA node. Okay? So does that make sense about heart rate?
Yeah.
Okay, what if you fall asleep? What happens to your heart rate?
It slows down.
It slows down. Good. Okay. So a lot of things affect heart rate. So the formula is CO times SV times HR. So we talked about heart rate, but only 3 things affect stroke volume. CO is equal to SV, stroke volume, times heart rate. Preload, contractility, and afterload. What is preload? What do you think preload means?
It's like
Go ahead. Go ahead.
it's like before contraction starts.
Okay, let's go back. You're right. What does that mean before contraction starts?
Like the heart's filling up, or like the
Yeah, bingo, bingo. That's the answer. The heart is filling up with blood, and that blood comes from 3 major veins: the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. So if there is a little bit of blood coming from your legs, a little bit of blood coming from your head, your preload would be decreased, correct? Somebody answer me.
Yes.
What would decrease preload?
Would decrease it.
if there's like not enough blood flow or something.
Yeah, okay. Now let's go into that.
So like clotting, I guess.
Clotting certainly could do it. What if you had a big clot in your femoral artery and no blood from your right leg would go up to your heart? That's decreasing preload, correct?
Yeah. Does that lead to like a heart attack?
Oh, yeah, big time. Remember, cardiac output is affected. Cardiac output is affected. Okay? What about if you have severe diarrhea for 3 days? What's your blood volume going to be, high or low? You got a 50%. Say it. Say it.
Oh,
Would it be
Say
higher?
it. It'd be lower. It'd be lower because your blood volume would be low because you lost water. You lost water. What if you're vomiting? You've lost water.
okay.
Okay. What if you're bleeding to death? What if you're shot in the abdominal aorta and your abdominal aorta is bleeding into your belly? What happens to preload? That blood won't go back to your heart. You have a hole in your aorta. Everybody understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Got
Now look at the formula. CO is SV times HR. When your preload affects your stroke volume and your stroke volume drops, what happens to your heart rate?
Okay.
Your heart goes down.
No, it goes up. It
Goes
has to
up?
go up because it has to equal your cardiac output. You have to maintain a cardiac output. If your cardiac output is 21 and your stroke volume is 7 and your heart rate is 3 and your stroke volume drops to 2, what happens to your heart rate? It's got to go up to make 21, right? Everybody understand what I'm trying to say here?
Wait, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I'll make it even simpler.
Here we go.
Let's see your cardiac output is 30. It's an imaginary number. It's 30. The formula is CO is equal to stroke volume times heart rate. Okay, let's say 300. I'll even make it easier. 300. Okay? And your stroke volume is 5 and your heart rate 60. So 300 is equal to 300, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now your stroke volume is cut in half. It's now 2.5. So now we have 300 is equal to 2.5 times 60. What happens to your heart rate? It's got to go up to make sure that that formula is equal on both sides. It's got to go up. Does everybody understand that?
Okay, I get it now.
Yeah, I get a little
Remember,
more now.
it's a formula. It's a formula. Each side has to equal the same number.
Hmm.
So if you drop your stroke volume, your heart rate has to go up to maintain the cardiac output. Who did I lose? I lost somebody. I know I lost somebody. We good?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you to do it again, but I think everybody else got it. I might just have to highlight you later about that. I don't know.
Okay, just let me know. Let me know. Let me know.
All right.
It's just you got to have the same. You got to have the same number on both sides. So if it's 300 on one side and one of the other two changes, you got to go up or down to equal 300.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay, that's all. It's just a formula. It's mathematics. Okay, but to know preload means the amount of blood going back to the right atria. That's what it means. Okay.
Yes,
What do
sir.
you think contractility means?
When it pumps the blood?
Yes, when it pumps the blood. So now you're talking about the muscle of the heart itself or the rhythm of the heart itself. So what you're talking about now is the ability of the heart to pump or the ability of the heart to accept electrical input to pump. So if you have an electrical problem in your heart and your rhythm changes, contractility will change. If you have a heart attack and part of your heart is not working, you're going to have a contractility problem. Everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay. And the third factor that regulates stroke volume is afterload. What in the world does afterload mean?
It releases it to the rest of the body.
Yeah, what it means is the blood leaving the heart? Is the blood leaving the heart too fast? Is the blood leaving the heart too slow? Is the blood leaving the heart too much? Is the blood leaving the heart too little?
Hmm.
Okay? So afterload is affected by the outflow tracts, the outflow valves. So if you have a problem with the aortic valve, it's known as aortic stenosis, you're going to have a problem. And there is a student who is going to give us a lecture on aortic stenosis, and that's an afterload problem. Okay? So the three factors that regulate stroke volume are preload, contractility, and afterload. And we talked about what affects heart rate. Cardiac output is equal to stroke volume times heart rate. Okay? And we talked about the stuff that affects your heart rate. If you're scared to death and epinephrine is surging in your body, your heart rate will go up. Some hormones, thyroid hormone, if you have an overabundance of thyroid hormone in your body, your heart rate will go up. If you have a decreased thyroid hormone in your body, it'll go down. What if you have too much potassium in your body? If you have too much potassium in your body, your heart will stop. I can kill you in 5 seconds by injecting you with potassium. Don't go out and kill your friends. But I can kill you immediately. It would take seconds. If I gave you the right amount of potassium in your veins, you would be dead. And this is what serial killers have done in the past, working as doctors. They've gone into nursing homes and they've killed nursing home residents with IV potassium. Okay, that's easy to diagnose because their potassium levels are high, and they have excess potassiam.
Is
They
that
can
what
do
they
it
give?
other ways. Sorry.
Is that what they do with the on death row? The last injection is usually like a potassium injection, correct?
No. It's not. It's a barbiturate of some sort. It's not potassium. No, that would be cruel and unfair punishment.
I mean, death row kind of period is kind of cruel.
You ain't got to tell me. You ain't got to tell me that. I understand that. I understand that. Okay. The easiest way to do it and not be caught, I won't tell you, is to do certain hormones into the body to create high potassium levels, which we're going to talk about in the endocrine system at the end of this course. But okay, what happens when you get older? What happens to your heart rate when you get older? What do you think?
It loses a beat every year. Like it slows down.
Yeah, it doesn't lose a beat every year, but it does slow down. It does slow down.
That's
There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Said in high school, it loses a beat every year.
No, that's not true. That's not true. If it loses a beat every year, you'd be dead by age 70. So, and I'm over 70 and I'm not dead yet. So,
True.
okay. What about males and females? What do you think? Who has a faster heartbeat, males or females?
Males.
Yeah, males. Males do. What if you're an athlete? What if you're one of my MMA guys? What if you're one of my boxing guys? What do you think your heart rate would be in a 20-year-old MMA fighter? Would it be fast or slow?
Fast.
Extremely fast.
Okay, it's not. It's extremely slow.
Yeah,
It's extremely slow because what they have conditioning. They've conditioned their heart to beat very, very slow. It's not unusual for one of my MMA fighters to have a heart rate of 40. Okay? They've conditioned their hearts to be very slow, so they're physically fit. They're
Isn't
physically
that
fit.
dangerous? If say you're like a bike rider and you always work out and your heartbeat could go to like 20 or 30, wouldn't that kill you if you sleep?
No, because you're used to it. You condition your heart to do that. Condition your heart to do that. Okay. Now, if my heart rate was 20 or 30, I would be in trouble. Okay. But someone who's physically fit, their heart rate is usually in the 40s. It's usually in the 40s. Okay. What do you think heart rate would do if you have 106 temperature?
High.
Make it easier. Make it easy. What about 102 temperature? It's the same answer, high. It would be high. Okay. So all of these things affect heart rate, but only 3 things affect stroke volume. Okay. Everybody got that?
Yes.
Okay. I told you before that your heart is auto-regulated. It doesn't need the brain. However, the brain can affect heart rhythm. The brain can affect heart rhythm. The majority of the brain is the cerebral cortex, the limbic system, or the hypothalamus. And these all function in basically controlling your heart rate. Okay? You know, if you see a snake or if you smell fire, your heart rate's going to go up and you're going to get the hell out of there. So that's how the brain actually does it. But there are certain nerves in your body that can affect heart rate. The majority of these nerves will increase your heart rate because it's all due to epinephrine. However, there is one nerve that will always lower your heart rate. And that nerve is the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, the champion of the parasympathetic system. It will always decrease your heart rate. Always. Always. Okay? So the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, will always lower your heart rate. Always. And that's important. We talked about preload. Here's an example of increasing. We talked about contractility. We talked about afterload. And this is sort of a review of what we talked about. Okay? Okay, exercise. Exercise is pretty good. It increases your cardiac output. How does it increase your cardiac output? What happens to your heart rate when you exercise?
It goes higher.
It goes higher. So does your stroke volume basically change when you exercise? Are you losing a lot of fluid?
Yeah.
Not really. Not in that one exercise, you're not.
Okay.
So if your stroke volume stays the same and your heart rate goes up, what happens to your cardiac output?
It increases.
Mm-hmm. It increases. It increases. Exercise also increases high density lipoproteins, HDL. Is HDL good protein or bad protein? This is cholesterol, by the way. This is cholesterol. So high density lipoproteins. There are 2 types of cholesterol in your body. LDL, low density lipoproteins, and HDL, high density lipoproteins. Which one is good cholesterol? HDL or LDL?
HDL.
HDL is good cholesterol. Here's how you can remember it. H stands for happy. L stands for lousy. So HDL is good, LDL is bad. Okay. It also decreases another lipoprotein in your body called triglycerides. So exercise is very good. It improves your lung function. It decreases your blood pressure and assists in weight control. So exercising is very, very good. That's important. All right. Failing hearts, I'm really not going to ask you any questions on failing hearts. This is for medical students. You don't need to know about failing hearts or the intra-aortic balloon pump or the left ventricular assist mechanisms. You don't really have to know anything about that. I would not ask you questions on that. And I will not ask you any questions on embryology either. But I am going to ask you questions on some of these diseases. I will give you a lecture on coronary artery disease. I will give you a lecture on arrhythmias. And you're going to get lots of lectures on some diseases. All right?